He survived bullets to the face, a plane crash, a prison camp escape, and more shrapnel than most battalions saw in a lifetime. Yet he died peacefully in his 80s, in a quiet Irish house. His name was Adrian Carton de Wiart, and to the men who fought beside him, he was not just a soldier. He was a rumor in human form, a walking contradiction that refused to die. He did not begin life as a hardened British officer marching through mud and shellfire. He began as Adrian Paul Ghislaine Carton de Wiart, a Belgian aristocrat born in Brussels in 1880, surrounded by servants, polished floors, and expectations. There were whispers that he might be an illegitimate son of King Leopold II of Belgium, the kind of gossip that clings to wealthy families and never really dies. But what mattered more was that he grew up knowing comfort, status, and languages, including Arabic from years spent in Cairo with his father. His stepmother eventually sent him to a Roman Catholic boarding school in England, then on to Balliol College, Oxford, where he was meant to read law and drift into a respectable life as a gentleman. Instead, he looked at the law books, felt nothing, then looked at the world and wanted war. When the Second Boer War broke out in 1899, it sounded like an invitation. He walked away from Oxford, lied about his age, and enlisted in the British Army as a common trooper under the name Carton, claiming to be 25 when he was barely 20. South Africa was not a parade ground. It was dust, heat, and sudden gunfire over scrubby ground. As Paget's horse rode out under the big sky, Adrian was no longer a pampered son. He was one of many men in a sweating column, rifle on his shoulder, the air full of flies and tension. The Boers were skilled, mobile and invisible until they fired. Somewhere in that confusing landscape of low hills and ambushes, Adrian caught bullets in the stomach and groin. The pain was white-hot and personal. He went down in the dirt among other wounded men, the air full of shouting and the clatter of hooves as stretcher parties scrambled to pull them back. Invalided home, he faced not a medal ceremony, but a furious father who had just discovered that his son had dropped out of Oxford to chase war. Somehow, the army won that argument. After a brief attempt to return to university, Adrian received a commission in the 2nd Imperial Light Horse and went back to South Africa, this time as an officer. By 1901, he held a regular commission in the 4th Dragoon Guards. The Edwardian army suited him. He rode, played polo, hunted, and built the fitness that his first serious wound had convinced him he would need again. By temperament, he was already an outlier. In male company, he was loud, relentlessly direct, and supposedly held the world record for bad language. He loved sport, risk, and any chance to be near the sharp edge of things. He was also very good at his job, rising through the cavalry, serving as aide-de-camp and regimental adjutant. He looked set for a solid, if conventional, career. Then the world lurched toward catastrophe. When the First World War began in 1914, he was on his way to British Somaliland, a sideshow of empire where Britain was fighting the followers of Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, nicknamed the Mad Mullah by the British. Adrian joined the Somaliland Camel Corps and found exactly what he wanted: a small, hard fight in brutal terrain, with the enemy dug into rocky hill forts. At Shimber-Berries, as British-led forces attacked an enemy stronghold perched in the harsh Somali hills, bullets snapped and ricocheted off stone. Dust, smoke, and shouting turned the world into a blur. As Adrian led men forward, a shot caught him in the face. Then another. He went down with blood pouring from his head. When he woke properly, he discovered he had lost his left eye and part of his ear. The dressing was crude, the field hospital crowded and hot, with canvas walls flapping and the smell of blood, carbolic and sweat thick in the air. For his actions, he received the Distinguished Service Order. For the rest of his life, he wore a black eye patch that turned his already fierce presence into something almost piratical. He did not retire. He did not even slow down. Early in 1915, he shipped out to France, trading Somali rocks for French mud, the harsh light of the Horn of Africa for the gray sky over the Western Front. He took command of infantry, not cavalry, leading 1st Battalions and eventually a brigade. The trenches were a world of duckboards, sandbags, flickering candles in dugouts, and the constant percussion of artillery. Shell bursts turned men into smoke. Machine guns chewed up whole waves of infantry in seconds. Carton de Wiart treated it as work to be done. He walked the fire step, inspected men, and went over the top with them. He was wounded again and again. He was shot in the hand, the wrist, the leg, the hip, the ear. At one point, his left hand was so badly injured that a doctor refused to amputate his mangled fingers, hoping to save them. Adrian simply tore them off himself so he could get back into action faster. The hand was eventually removed, leaving him with an empty sleeve to match his eye patch. By the middle of the war, he looked like a caricature of a war hero. Men described him riding along the line on a lively horse, cap at a rakish angle, black patch where one eye had been, sleeve pinned up where a hand should have been, and a body marked by 11 wound stripes. To the exhausted infantry, slogging through the mud of the Somme or Passchendaele, he seemed more like a force of nature than a man. If someone that battered could still shout orders and demand straight bootlaces on parade, maybe survival was possible. He also had a reputation as a fire eater, an officer who never missed a chance to throw himself and his men into whatever fighting was going. This was not comfortable for those under his command, but they respected the fact that he always shared the risk. When shells burst close, he was there. When companies went forward into fog and machine gun fire, he went with them. The mud of France, thick and cold around their boots, was the same mud around his. As the casualty lists grew and towns across Britain filled with black armbands and empty chairs at dinner tables, Adrian Carton de Wiart went back to the front again and again. Shot through the skull and ankle at the Somme, through the hip at Passchendaele, through the leg at Cambrai, through the ear at Arras. He kept returning after each stay in the dim light of field hospitals and convalescent homes. Around the campfires, in dugouts lit by candles and cigarettes, stories spread about him. The one-eyed officer who tore off his own fingers. The man who could not be kept away from the front, no matter how badly he was hit. The officer who seemed to prove by sheer bloody-mindedness that death sometimes missed its mark. The phrase unkillable was not yet his official nickname, but the idea was already taking root. By 1916, as the Battle of the Somme chewed up divisions and hope at the same rate, this scarred relentless officer would do something that finally forced the British Empire to put his name in the same league as its bravest. He was about to step into a shattered battlefield called La Boisseau, where his refusal to die would earn him the highest award for valor the army could give, and push his legend far beyond the trenches that already whispered his name. By the summer of 1916, the mud around La Boisseau was a graveyard of broken timber and brown water. Into that chaos moved a one-eyed, one-handed officer who refused to accept that the day belonged to the Germans. On the Somme, Adrian Carton de Wiart led his battalion through machine gun fire, rallying scattered companies and personally checking positions when communication lines were cut. For his actions, he received the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest award for gallantry in the face of the enemy. To the men in the trenches, the medal only caught up with reality. Months earlier, near Ypres, an artillery barrage had smashed his left hand, leaving fingers hanging by strips of skin. In a crowded field dressing station, with casualties stacked on stretchers, the doctor hesitated to amputate. Impatient to return to the line, Adrian tore off the ruined fingers himself so the bandaging could be finished. Surgeons later removed the whole hand. He later claimed he felt no pain. The war kept trying to finish what that shell had started. He was shot in the skull and ankle at the Somme, the hip at Passchendaele, the leg at Cambrai, the ear at Arras. He moved in a loop between muddy front lines and dim wards lit by oil lamps, listening to the groans of other casualties while nurses cleaned his bandages. Each time, as soon as he could stand and swear, he went back. By 1918, he wore 11 wound stripes, had lost an eye and a hand, and still wrote later that he had enjoyed the war. The armistice simply changed scenery. He served as a British liaison in the Polish-Soviet conflict, living out of trains and staff cars while front lines shifted across fields and towns. When the Second Global War began in 1939, he was nearly 60 and still not finished. He escaped from Poland as the German Blitz tore it apart, then took new commands for Britain, including a hard, losing effort to hold the Norwegian port of Namsos under German attack. In 1941, he was appointed to head a British mission to Yugoslavia. To reach it, he boarded a Vickers Wellington bomber rooting over the Mediterranean, with enemy territory on both sides. Somewhere off the coast of Italian-controlled Libya, both engines failed. The aircraft slammed into the sea. Inside the narrow cabin metal buckled, water rushed in, and the world turned to cold darkness. Carton de Wiart was knocked unconscious and jolted awake by freezing salt water. With one hand, he forced himself out through wreckage, surfaced among debris, and swam with the surviving crew toward a thin strip of shore. They crawled onto the beach, too tired even to stand. Italian soldiers closed in with rifles. The unkillable soldier was alive yet again, but now as a prisoner. He was moved first to the Villa Orsini near Sulmona, an elegant house turned cage, then to Castello di Vincigliata near Florence, a medieval fortress used as a camp for senior officers. Behind stone walls and barbed wire, with guard towers watching the courtyards. Days blurred into roll calls, thin soup, and censored letters. For many prisoners, it was limbo. For Adrian, it was a new job. With a small group of generals and staff officers, he began to plan escape. They watched guard routines, mapped fences, then started tunneling under the castle. For months, he lay on his side in a narrow shaft, scraping soil with improvised tools and passing it back in sacks, candles burning low near his one good eye. The air was stale and gritty, the ceiling inches from his face, but the tunnel crept slowly out beyond the walls. One breakout worked for a time. Disguised in rough local clothes as an Italian peasant, he slipped away from Vincigliata. The disguise was absurd. He was in his 60s, could not speak Italian, wore an eyepatch, had one empty sleeve and a face full of scars. Yet he stayed free for 8 days, moving along back roads and hedgerows, sleeping in fields under a Mediterranean sky, before police stopped the strange farmer who could not answer their questions. He went back behind the walls and simply began again. Inside the camp, he was remembered as loud, funny, and entirely without self-pity. Fellow prisoners called him a delightful character with record-breaking bad language. His refusal to take captivity as final and his constant focus on the next try kept morale alive in courtyards and cramped rooms. If stories like this fascinate you, tell me which unbelievable figure you want next. By 1943, Italy was close to collapse. Secret talks began between Italian officials and the Allies. The same qualities that made him a dangerous prisoner made him a useful go-between. The Italians released him, and he moved to Cairo, then to China as Winston Churchill's representative to Chiang Kai-shek. 1 year he was crawling through escape tunnels. The next he was in crowded war rooms and formal receptions, cane in hand, discussing strategy while air raid sirens sounded outside. After the war, he finally stepped away from service. In his mid-60s, his body was a catalog of damage, missing eye and hand, worn joints, scars wherever cloth did not cover. He retired to a quiet house in County Cork, Ireland, with his second wife and dogs. There were no searchlights there, only rain on fields, old floorboards, and the occasional crack of a shotgun when he went shooting on his land. He wrote his memoir, Happy Odyssey, then lived in relative peace until his death in 1963 at the age of 83. His life now reads like a script no modern producer would dare film. Shot in almost every limb, losing an eye and a hand. Surviving crashes in prison camps, he kept treating each disaster as a problem to solve rather than a final sentence. In an age that uses resilience as a slogan, his story is the uncomfortable, real version. Adrian Carton de Wiart walked through the worst machinery of the 20th century and came out the other side, half scar tissue and still grinning under that eye patch. Proof that sometimes human survival looks less like inspiration and more like stubborn refusal to stop.